What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Poetry and Prejudice. Today we are going to be reading When I Heard the Learned Astronomer by the great American poet Walt Whitman. This is one of Whitman's more widely anthologized poems. The only poem which is perhaps more anthologized is Song of Myself, and usually it's not anthologized in its entirety, just excerpts, and even more rarely is it read in its entirety. But that aside, what we're going to do today is we are going to read through the poem as a whole, and then I'm going to take it line by line and discuss the meaning of the poem, and we'll end with a discussion of the theme. With that said, let's crack into it. When I Heard the Learned Astronomer by Walt Whitman. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I sitting heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon, unaccountable, I became tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself, in the mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. The poem begins, when I heard the learned astronomer. A couple things here. In the first line, we already know what is occurring. The speaker is listening to an astronomer give a lecture, we learn later, in a lecture room. So I imagine this being at an academy or a college. Notice how the astronomer is described here as being learned. Now, this has, in my opinion, two meanings. First and foremost, straightforwardly, the astronomer is learned because in all likelihood, he is an academic. He's somebody who has a degree in astronomy. He's not somebody who pursues astronomy as an interest, as a passion. And I also think that this is very slyly an insult of the astronomer. We're going to come back to that towards the end of the poem, but I want you to just pin that in the back of your consciousness for now. It continues on. When the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I sitting heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room. So what is occurring here? Well, because the astronomer is an academic, he is using the scientific method, physics, mathematics, to understand the workings of the universe, to understand the stars, the moon, the sun, the planets, black holes, galaxies. And that is being described here in a very tedious way. What do I mean by that? Notice the repetition, and this is supposed to communicate how tiresome this is for the speaker. When I heard, when the proofs, when I was shown, when I sitting heard, right? There is that repetition, repetition, repetition. That is what's going on in the mind of the speaker. This learned astronomer, once again, I think this is an insult, is droning on about his understanding of the universe. Understanding. We'll come back to that in a second here. Now, what happens with the speaker at the end of this lecture? Well, there's a couple interesting things. Notice first and foremost that the lecturer, the astronomer, gets much applause. So it seems like the audience is very impressed with his demonstration of his intelligence, his grasp of the universe. But the speaker, in this case, does not have the same attitude. What does he say? How soon, unaccountable, I became sick and tired. Now, why does he become tired and sick? Well, because he has a completely different attitude towards understanding the universe. He also says unaccountable, by which he means he's saying, I don't know why it is that I became tired and sick. I don't think that's actually the case here. I think the speaker knows full well why it is that he found this learned astronomer so tiresome, and we're going to get to that right now. What happens? He says, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself. Notice the language here. Rising, of course, he's getting up. He's perhaps leaving his chair, getting ready to leave the lecture room or the lecture hall, and he glides out, right? Glide. almost like he does it with extreme ease, as if he's just trying to get away, gliding out. I wandered off by myself. Where does the speaker go in this instance? It's not clear, it's not described, but I imagine him almost as taking a path or a trail into the woods, and perhaps he finds himself standing in a meadow, staring up at the starry pelt of the universe. I wandered off by myself. In the mystical, moist night air, this is very beautiful imagery. Mystical is a word that I want us to home in on because this one word captures the attitude of the speaker towards the universe, if you will. And this is in contrast to the learned astronomer's grasp or understanding of the universe. Mystical implying both that it's magical in a certain sense and also that it is a mystery. Of course, the learned astronomer thinks that he can explain the workings of the universe using human systems of science, reason, mathematics, physics, what have you. The speaker doesn't seem to have the same attitude, and so he stares up at the universe, not necessarily knowing how it works, and he's still amazed. He's in awe at the mystical, moist night air. And then he says, from time to time, looked up in perfect silence at the stars. Couple things here. So notice perfect silence. That is to be strongly contrasted once again with the learned astronomer who goes on. He's droning. When I heard, when I heard, when I saw, when I was, when I was, when I was, right? He's droning on in his lecture about the universe. The speaker here doesn't need to hear a lecture. He doesn't need to give a lecture. It's enough for him to simply stand in a meadow, perhaps, stare up at the sky and look at the stars and be in total awe. That seemingly is the only experience that the speaker needs for his grasp of the universe. We could also call into question whether the learned astronomer is actually grasping the universe, because of course, knowledge in science is never static. It continually changes over time. The universe that Newton had in mind is very different from the universe that Einstein had in mind. So to what extent the learned astronomer is actually learned, I would argue is somewhat questionable. And I find myself having more of the attitude of the speaker in this poem, perhaps because I write poetry and I'm an English professor. I have just more of a mystical appreciation of things, and I don't necessarily need to know how everything works to grasp or understand it. I will say in contrast to that, I've heard astronomers and I was going to say physicians. People who study physics are what? I keep wanting to say physicians, but that doesn't sound correct. Physicists, that's it, physicists. People who are physicists make the argument that, in fact, science helps us to see more of the mystery and the majesty of the universe, because the reality is that no matter how far the scientific method goes, what's going to happen is we may be able to gain some knowledge of the universe, but that's going to open up the doors or the windows to other mysteries. It's just a simple fact of human knowledge, epistemological systems, the more we learn and the more we know, the more, in fact, we learn that we don't know. And of course, that is Socrates' definition of being wise, knowing what it is that you do not know. Is that the case? I can't say. You'll determine for yourself. I will just say I have more sympathy with the speaker of the poem in this case. I kind of have a poetic attitude towards the universe. I don't need to necessarily have it explained to me in mathematics or through the use of human systems of reason and measurement. I'm going to go ahead and leave it here. Let me know what you guys think about my interpretation in the comments down below. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree? Do you have other insights? Is there something that I missed here? I greatly appreciate your guys' comments. It's going to help me gain a better appreciation for this poem. And with that said, I will see you in the next video.